So today I'm going to continue reading The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe by C.S. Lewis. Just to recap, we learned that there are 4 siblings named Peter, Susan, Edmund, and Lucy who were sent away during the war because of the air raids. So they're sent to this old professor who lives in the heart of the country, 10 miles away from anything. And they get there and they're arguing back and forth about whether or not they'll be able to get away with doing anything. So far they're in high spirits about meeting him and the maid. And Lucy and the others start exploring. Well, Lucy finds an old wardrobe and she goes inside of it. And she feels for where the back is and she just keeps going. And she happens into this place that's snowing and she meets this like weird goat man. So that's where we left off. So she's gonna, I don't know what she's gonna do, but we're gonna find out if she's gonna run back or if she's gonna stay there. So what Lucy found there. "Good evening," said Lucy, but the fawn was so busy picking up its parcels that at first it did not reply. When it had finished, it made her a little bow. Good evening, said the fawn. "Excuse me, I don't want to be inquisitive, but should I be right in thinking that you are a daughter of Eve?" "My name is Lucy," she said, not quite understanding him. "But you are, forgive me, you are what they call a girl?" said the fawn. "Of course I'm a girl," said Lucy. "You are in fact human?" "Of course I'm human," said Lucy, still a little puzzled. To be sure, said the fawn. "How stupid of me. But I've never seen a son of Adam or a daughter of Eve before. I am delighted." That is to say, and then it stopped as if it had begun going to say something it had not intended but had remembered in time. Delighted, it went on. "Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Tumminus." "I am very pleased to meet you, Mr. Tumminus," said Lucy. "And may I ask, O Lucy, daughter of Eve," said Mr. Tumminus, "how you have come into Narnia?" "Narnia? What's that?" said Lucy. "This is the land of Narnia," said the fawn. "Where we are now, all that lies between the lamp-post and the great castle of Cair Paravel on the eastern sea. And you have come from the wild woods of the west?" I got through the wardrobe in the spare room," said Lucy. "Ah," said Mr. Tumminus in a rather melancholy voice, "if only I had worked harder at geography when I was a little fawn, I should no doubt know all about those strange countries. It is too late now." "But they aren't countries at all," said Lucy, almost laughing. "It's only just back there, at least. I'm not sure. It is summer there." "Meanwhile," said Mr. Tumminus, "it is winter in Narnia, and there has been for ever so long, and we shall both catch cold if we stand here talking in the snow. Daughter of Eve, from the far land of Spare Oam, where eternal summer reigns around the bright city of Wardrobe, how would it be if you came and had tea with me?" "Thank you very much, Mr. Tumminus," said Lucy. "But I was wondering whether I ought to be getting back." "It's only around the corner," said Fawn, "and there'll be a roaring fire, and toast, and sardines, and cake." "Well, that's very kind of you," said Lucy, "but I shouldn't be able to stay very long." This is them. "If you will take my arm, daughter of Eve," said Mr. Tumminus, "I shall be able to hold the umbrella over both of us. This way. Now off we go." And so Lucy found herself walking through the wood arm in arm with this strange creature as if they had known each other all their lives. They had not gone far before they came to a place where the ground became rough and there were rocks all about a little hill upon a little hills down. At the bottom of one small valley, Mr. Tumminus turned suddenly aside as if he were going to walk straight into an unusually large rock. But at the last moment, Lucy found he was leading her into the entrance of a cave. As soon as they were inside, she found herself blinking in the light of a wood fire. Then Mr. Thomas stopped and took a flaming piece of wood out of the fire with a neat little pair of tongs and a lit lamp. "Now, we shan't be long," he said, and immediately put a kettle on. Lucy thought she had never been in a nicer place. It was a little dry, clean cave with reddish stone with a carpet on the floor and 2 little chairs. "One for me and one for a friend," said Mr. Thomas. "And a table and a dresser and a mantelpiece over the fire, and above that picture of an old faun with a gray beard in one corner there was a door, which Lucy thought must lead to Mr. Thomas's bedroom. And on one wall was a shelf full of books. Lucy looked at these while he was setting out the tea things. They had titles, the life and the letters of Silenus and nymphs and their ways or men, monks and gamekeepers, a study in popular legends, or Is Man a Myth? "Now, daughter of Eve," said Fawn. And really, it was a wonderful tea. There was a nice brown egg lightly boiled for each of them, and then sardines on toast, and then buttered toast, and toast with honey, and then a sugar-topped cake. And when Lucy was tired of eating, the fawn began to talk. He had wonderful tales to tell of life in the forest. He told about the midnight dances, and how the nymphs who lived in the wells and the dryads who lived in the trees came out to dance with the fawns, about long hunting parties after the milk-white stag who could give you wishes if you caught him, about feasting and treasure-seeking with the wild red dwarfs in deep mines and caverns far beneath the forest floor, and about the summer when the woods were green and the old Silenus on his fat donkey would come to visit them, and sometimes Bacucus himself, and then the streams would run with wine instead of water, and the whole forest would give itself up to jollification for weeks on end. Not that it isn't always winter now," he added gloomily. Then, to cheer himself up, he took out from its case on the dresser a strange little flute that looked as if it were made of straw, and began to play. And the tune he played made Lucy want to cry and laugh and dance and go to sleep all at the same time. It must have been hours later when she shook herself and said, "Oh, Mr. Thomas, I'm so sorry to stop you, and I do love that tune, but really I must go home. I only meant to stay for a few minutes." "It's no good now, you know," said the fawn, laying down its flute and shaking its head at her very sorrowfully. "No good?" said Lucy, jumping up and feeling rather frightened. "What do you mean?" "I've got to go home at once. The others will be wondering what happened to me." But a moment later she asked, "Mr. Thomas, whatever is the matter?" For the fawn's brown eyes had filled with tears, and the tears began trickling down its cheeks, and soon they were running off the end of its nose, and at last it covered its face with its hands and began to howl. "Mr. Thomas, Mr. Thomas," said Lucy in great distress. Don't. What is the matter? Are you well?" "Dear Mr. Thomas, do tell me what is wrong." But the fawn continued sobbing as if its heart would break, and even when Lucy went over and put her arms around him and lent him her handkerchief, he did not stop. He merely took the handkerchief and kept on using it, wringing it out with both hands whenever it got too wet to be any more use, so that presently Lucy was standing in a damp patch. "Mr. Thomas," bawled Lucy in his ear, shaking him, "do stop. Stop it at once. You ought to be ashamed of yourself. A great big fawn like you. What on earth are you crying about?" Oh, sobbed Mr. Thomas. "I'm crying because I'm such a bad fawn." "I don't think you're a bad fawn at all," said Lucy. "I think you're a very good fawn. You are the nicest fawn I've ever met." Oh, you wouldn't say that if you knew," replied Mr. Thomas between his sobs. "No, I'm a bad fawn. I don't suppose there ever was a worse fawn since the beginning of the world." "But what have you done?" asked Lucy. "My old father now," said Mr. Thomas. "That's his picture over the mantelpiece. He would never have done a thing like this." "A thing like what?" said Lucy. "Like what I have done," said the fawn. "Take service under the White Witch. That's what I mean. I'm in the pay of the White Witch." "The White Witch? Who's she?" "Why, it's she that has got all Narnia under her thumb. It is she that makes it always winter. Always winter and never Christmas. Think of that." "How awful," said Lucy. "But what does she pay you for?" That's the worst of it, said Mr. Thomas, with a deep groan. I'm a kidnapper for her. That's what I am. Look at me, daughter of Eve. Would you believe that I'm the sort of fawn to meet a poor, innocent child in the woods, one that had never done me any harm, and pretend to be friendly with it and invite it home to my cave, all for the sake of lulling it to sleep and then handing it over to the White Witch? No, said Lucy. I'm sure you wouldn't do anything of the sort. But I have, said the fawn. Well, Lucy rather slowly, for she wanted to be truthful and yet not be too hard on him. Well, that was pretty bad. But you're so sorry for it, and I'm sure you will never do it again. Daughter of Eve, don't you understand, said the fawn. It isn't something I have done. I'm doing it now, this very moment. What do you mean? Cried Lucy, turning very white. You are the child, said Thomas. I have ordered from the White Witch that if I ever saw a son of Adam or daughter of Eve in the wood, I was to catch them and hand them over to her. And you are the first I've ever met, and I've pretended to be your friend and asked you to tea, and all the time I've been meaning to wait till you were asleep and then go and tell her. Oh, but you won't, Mr. Thomas, said Lucy. You won't, will you? Indeed, you really mustn't. And if I don't, he began crying again. She's sure to find out, and she'll have my tail cut off, and my horns sawn off, and my beard plucked out, and she'll wave her wand over my beautiful cloven hooves and turn them into horrid solid hooves, like a wretched horse's. And if she is extra and specially angry, she'll turn me into stone, and I shall be only a statue of a fawn in her horrible house until 4 thrones at Claire Prevel are filled, and goodness knows where that will happen. Knows when that will happen, or whether it will ever happen at all. I'm very sorry, Mr. Thomas, said Lucy, but please let me go home. Of course I will, said the fawn. Of course I've got to. I see that now. I hadn't known what humans were like before I met you. Of course I can't give you up to the witch. Not now that I know you. But we must be off at once. I'll see you back at the lamppost. I suppose you can find your way from there back to the spare ohm and war of Drobe. I'm sure I can, said Lucy. We must go as quietly as we can, Mr. Thomas. The whole wood is full of her spies, and even some of the trees are on her side. They both got up and left the tea things on the table, and Mr. Thomas once more put up his umbrella and gave Lucy his arm, and they went out into the snow. The journey back was not at all like the journey to the fawn's cave. They stole along quickly as they could without speaking a word, and Mr. Thomas kept the darkest place. Lucy was relieved when they reached the lamppost again. Do you know your way from here, daughter of Eve? Said Thomas. Lucy looked very hard between the trees and could just see in the distance a patch of light that looked like daylight. Yes, she said, I can see the wardrobe door. Then be off home as quick as you can, said the fawn. And can you ever forgive me? What I meant to do? Why, of course I can, said Lucy, shaking him heartily by the hand, and I do hope you won't get into dreadful trouble on my account. Farewell, daughter of Eve, said he. Perhaps I may keep the handkerchief? Rather, said Lucy, and then ran towards the far-off patch of daylight as quickly as her legs would carry her. And presently, instead of rough branches brushing past her, she felt coats, and instead of crunching snow under her feet, she felt wooden boards, and all at once she found herself jumping out of the wardrobe in the same empty room from which the whole adventure had started. She shut the wardrobe door tightly behind her and looked around the painting for a breath. It was still raining, and she could hear the voices of the others in the passage. I'm here, she shouted. I'm here. I've come back, and I'm all right. So that's the end of chapter 2. And tomorrow I will read Edmund and the Wardrobe. So after listening to this, I want you guys to think of what might happen next when she comes back and is she going to tell them about what just happened to her? Or do you think she'll keep it a secret? And if she does tell them, do you think that they'll want to go in? Or do you think they'll want to just stay home? So just something to think about. Thanks for listening.